Miami fans, lock it in here for some Canes football talk with spring practice just a couple of weeks away. We got Brad Tejeda on the line from Canes Insight, so we would encourage you to head on over to his YouTube channel. Brad, how are we doing today?
Doing great, Mark. Thank you for having me. It's an honor to be on the show to talk some Miami Hurricanes football and get these fans pumped.
So as you look at this football team, what piques your interest in regards to whether those are certain positional units, certain players, storylines that you're looking at?
Yeah, Mark, I think, right off the bat, spring practice is on Monday, so we're right around the corner from things happening very quickly for the Miami Hurricanes. And I think the one word that I'm probably going to say a lot throughout this show is going to be competition. And I think that's something that the Miami Hurricanes have not had in a very long time. When you look back to our program, when we were at the top, it wasn't who we played against. It was who we were up against in practice every single day. And I think for the Miami Hurricanes to get back where they need to be, it has to start on Greentree. And in order to do that, you have to create legit competition, not just have guys, with their last name on the back and just fillers. I want to see depth get slowly created like we did in the old days, going straight to the running back position, right? We have 5 blue chip recruits coming in for this 2021 roster for the Miami Hurricanes, just in the running back position alone. And I know some people, they were a little afraid or timid about a newcomer in Thad Franklin, what his thoughts may be with the addition of Cody Brown, who originally was committed to Tennessee, who is from the Georgia area. And now you look at this running back depth with the situation that happened last year. You have one senior in Cam Harris, and all the other running backs on this roster are still freshmen. That includes a Jalen Knighton and a Don Chaney who got a pretty good reps last year, and you saw some great things from both of them, especially Don Chaney. So, I mean, we're starting to create that depth, from back in the day where you had the Clinton Portises, the Willis McGahees, Frank Gore, Quadron Hill, Jared Payton, Najee Diamondport. I mean, if you want Miami to get back, you have to create those depths, and a wide receiver is another position, right? You look at this roster, and I think what's very unique about this team this year is we have a lot of guys that came back this year. 91% of our returning production is coming back for this football team this season, and that's huge for Miami because that's something that we're not really used to. And I think when you look at this football team, most of the players on this team are not really star players. They haven't been proven yet. There's a lot of guys who are in their 3rd or 4th year who still have to prove themselves in order to get drafted where they want. And then you have a lot of young guys, whether it be incoming freshmen or guys who barely played last year as a freshman, that want to step up and be that next guy. I mean, I think one name to look for, especially on offense, Mark, is going to be Keyshawn Smith out of California.
Yeah, you started with the running back position, and it's loaded. It was impressive, as you mentioned, with Cam Harris, of course, leading the way, but with Knighton and especially Chaney getting their carries and showing flashes. So do you think you have a good feel for what each one can do well and how they should be used in the distribution of carries?
Yes, I think what Rat Lashley wants to do is he wants to be very diverse. I think what you're seeing is now when you have other guys behind those two, you're not really having to solely rely on 1 or 2 guys from this past season. I think with not having a full offseason, it was very tough for our 2 incoming freshmen in Chaney and Knighton to kind of get into that solid, comfortable role, just because, especially in pass protection, I'm sure either the coaching staff or just them in general weren't too comfortable yet. You saw a lot of opportunities where you think Knighton should have been in, especially in passing downs, and it seemed like Chaney and Cam Harris still took that role over. And I think now with a full offseason, Jalen Knighton fully recovered as well, who's battling a little bit of nagging injuries throughout the season. You're going to see a lot of diversity. And we didn't even mention, Thad Franklin and potentially Cody Brown, who could end up, playing too. That's a young man who Miami was very hard on his radar last year. That was a running back that we wanted from last class. So it's nice to add him as well. And he, like I mentioned, he's originally from Georgia. So we're creating that Georgia pipeline between Coach Jess Simpson, him, and then you have 2 recruits that we're going after right now, and Ja'Cory Brown out of Georgia and Isaiah Bond out of Georgia. So I think what you're seeing is we're starting to create what we kind of did in Jacksonville, the Duval area when we had Coach Hartley. We're starting to do that in Georgia. And it's going to be very interesting with some of the other coaches we added that we could potentially do that not only in Georgia, but the state of Texas and California could start to become more of a stomping ground for Miami.
We got Brad Tejeda on the line from Canes Insight. Check out his work. Just plug in Canes Insight right here on YouTube, and you can check out the channel. Plenty of Miami Hurricanes talk for you to look at there. All right. You know, in regards to what was accomplished or not accomplished, depending on your perspective, I certainly hear the good and the bad and the positive and negative, depending on that approach from that particular fan of what happened in 2020. So I don't know that this, considering the talent on this roster versus the division, that it could get much worse than 2019. You know, losing to FIU and Duke and Georgia Tech, losing to teams like that with this kind of talent and getting shut out in a bowl game. So there was the obvious improvement in record. You go to 8-3 coming off 6-7. You can look at much improvement at the quarterback position, a better field goal kicker that can make the kicks. Those were two obvious upgrades. Offensive coordinator, Rhett Lashley, compared to Dan Enos. Do you feel as though, you know, there are easy ways to mark the improvement in 2020, but there are also ways to look at it and say, did you really need to struggle against the likes of Pitt and Virginia Tech every week in those games? NC State, you pull that one out after being down by 10 in the fourth quarter. They're a decent team, but still kind of messing around with those 500 kind of teams in the Coastal. How do you assess 2020, whether it gave you hope for the future or you just feel there's a long ways to go still?
I mean, obviously going to 2020 before the season started, I think most Hurricane fans had a little bit of hope. I mean, when you add a guy like Rhett Lashley and a dynamic player like De'Aaron King, there's a lot of hope there. I think what we wanted to see was that spark in the offense, and I think we did see that. The problem is, especially with the Hurricanes team, it seems like we're never able to get on the same page and have the offense and the defense and the special teams working all fluently in a football game. And you're still seeing that, especially in 2020. There were bright moments for the offense, and then there were bright moments for the defense. You go to that Duke game, that was one of those games where a lot of fans, you know, were honed in on Blake Baker getting fired and him not being a great defensive coach, which, I mean, I don't disagree. But you look at that game in particular, along with the Florida State game, which is obviously a big rivalry game. Those are two games that stood out where, I mean, not only on paper, but when you see the eye test, they passed every single thing possible, whether it be on offense, defense, special teams. And then you go to a team like North Carolina. I mean, that's the game that pretty much gives all of us fans nightmares. It's a team that obviously Coach Matt Brown, who has taught Manny Diaz. I think that's one of the issues that you're starting to see with Manny Diaz is he's not able to adjust, especially when he's going against, you know, some of the guys that kind of taught him, right? And I think when you really look at is Manny Diaz knows that in this 2021 year, him being in his third year, this is make or break year. You look at some of the great coaches that we try to compare ourselves to, the Nick Sabans, the Dabo Sweeneys. Manny Diaz is nowhere close to that, let's be honest. But when you go back to Nick Saban, when you go back to Dabo Sweeney, when they first started as a head coach, it wasn't until their third year when they started actually producing quality wins and having key opponent wins. And I think this is where Manny Diaz comes in play. And he knows, just like all of us Cane fans, that this is make or break year. De'Aaron King came back. Most of your guys who you thought usually would declare for the draft comes back. And you add extraordinary coaches onto this staff. I mean, this is probably on paper one of the best coaching staffs that the Miami Hurricanes football team has had in quite a long time. You bring in a guy like T-Rob, who is a secondary coach that's already been proven at multiple colleges, has produced NFL guys such as Vernon Hargraves and a few other names as well. But the Coach Simpson hire is just as good just because he's already been at the University of Miami. He has proven he knows exactly what it takes to get done at this program. And especially going back to that North Carolina game, the trenches, specifically in the D-line, the gap interior, following your assignments, that's something that Jeff Simpson hones on. And that's one of his strengths. And then, you know, the other hire is Bob Shoop. The Bob Shoop hire, in my opinion, kind of gave me kudos and a pat on the back to Manny Diaz, because I think one thing that a lot of fans were a little concerned about is the staff that we've had in place the past couple of years were all what they say yes men, right? Guys who didn't really want to go against Manny's word in a sense, or Manny was kind of just the only authoritative guy because everyone that was under him were his guys. Well, now he brings in T-Rob, who demands a lot more. You bring in a coach, Jess Simpson, who was a prior head coach in Georgia for over 20, 25 years and has, credibility at the Atlanta Falcons organization, and Bob Shoop, who has over 30 years of experience. That alone right there told me that Manny Diaz is open to learning and asking for advice. And I go back to the Ask Madden button in a video game. I think now this is the year where Manny Diaz has an Ask Shoot button, where we're going to be able to game plan, in prior games before. And I think that's something that hurt, especially in that North Carolina game.
Well, not to dwell on 2020, but you did go to the North Carolina game a number of times. And this is what was meaningful to me about that game. And this is what I took away from that game. I looked at the schedule and thought, if Miami plays not what they did in 2019, if they play reasonably up to expectations, they're so much better than everybody on the schedule except Clemson and North Carolina. So Clemson, I was curious to see, but we saw it determined that Clemson is still significantly better. So we saw that. And then I'm looking at the rest of the schedule and thinking, as long as I'm watching Miami continue to win one-score games for the most part against NC State and Virginia Tech on down the line, this isn't showing me a whole lot because it's showing me that they're better, but they're really not putting the hammer down and crushing these teams. They're quality teams. Not that they should beat them 50-0, but they should be winning these games more in the 3-touchdown range. I'm looking at that North Carolina game all season, and we come up on that weekend, and I'm thinking, this is the game I want to see because this is finally the team that's on the same level. Almost exactly should be at that point on the same level. And I got to say, Brad, had somebody told me Carolina wins this game 62-26, I would have been surprised, first of all, but then I would have thought, especially with what you mentioned about the cornerback situation being what it was as a sore spot, I would have thought Sam Howell bombed them. He just threw for 550 and 6 touchdowns, but he only had to throw the ball 19 times. To see the physical beating was alarming to me by both the offensive line and the backs just throwing a hip and a thigh at the secondary and the linebackers and just plowing people all day. Was a bit alarming. It was only one game, so I don't want to blow it out of proportion, but it was a bit alarming.
Unfortunately, I mean, you brought up the biggest point, though, Mark. That was the game that we all circled. That was the game where, like you said, this was make or break 2020. This is what's going to dictate if you're in the ACC championship, which is obviously the next goal in reality for the Miami Hurricanes. Is we have to get back to the ACC championship. We have to start winning the Coastal. And I think, unfortunately, you go back to 2019 and the terrible season we had then. You compare that 2019 to the 2020 season. I think between all the off-season hype and just being able to pull out close victories, don't get me wrong, we shouldn't be close games with some of the teams that we did in 2020. But I think, unfortunately, that was just a realistic next step for the Miami Hurricanes, is having to win close games, because I think that's something that our football team just wasn't used to doing. Anytime there was a close game in the past 5-6 years, we typically get blown out when it comes crunch time. And you saw in 2020, we at least, battled it out, and with the likes of De'Ara King and a few other guys, we were able to get a few extra wins. I mean, especially that special teams. You can't forget Andy Borregales and Lou Headley, who both ended up winning the awards for their position. I mean, those are two guys that without them two alone, we probably don't win 2 or 3 of those games in 2020.
Good stuff from Brad Tejeda. Please check out the complete work there at Canes Insight. It's right here on YouTube. You just go to the search bar, type in Canes Insight. You're going to find him right there. Because in bringing up North Carolina, I was not surprised once we get to the bowl game, and I hate that the bowl games are compromised by players missing, so you kind of have to try to judge what it was. But I thought it was pretty even on both sides in terms of the personnel losses, but that's about what I expect. That was the next game where, okay, Miami's playing somebody else on their tier, a top 15 to 20 team in the country, and you want to win that game, but it wasn't. It was a close game. You got down big. N'Kosi Perry played well. You got back in the game, and that's pretty much what I expected out of that game. It's a 34-31 game. Okay, I get it. It makes sense. But that North Carolina game, that one stunned me a little bit. here's one for you, because this is constantly brought up on my channel regarding Miami football. Because I could take either argument. I don't think it's ridiculous to go either side on this. Is this program elite?
No, unfortunately, as much as I love my Hurricanes, they're not elite anymore. Unfortunately, the U does still hold weight. Don't get that twisted, right? Whether it be in the NFL or still in college football, you see when the University of Miami starts winning football games, we're on national television week in and week out. I mean, it doesn't matter if we're playing a good team or just an average team. You go back to that 17 season where we were like 4 or 5 weeks in a row college game day, whether it be Pittsburgh, Notre Dame, Virginia Tech. And we got a close, small feeling of that last year when we started getting on that run at the beginning of the year. And then obviously once Clemson came, it kind of stubbed us. But I think we got to have slow steps, small steps. And I think, unfortunately, that's very tough for our Hurricane fan base because we are instant gratification. We want everything right now. And I like to play both sides of it, but I got to say this: you got to give Manny some type of credit because I do think in the past year, like 10, 15 years, anytime an obvious decision needs to be made, or a coach that is available, or a player that's available, it's very obvious that we need to go after those guys. And it just seemed like we never did that. Ever since Manny Diaz has been the head coach, yes, his first year, it was more of a trial and tribulations because like anything you do for your first time, you're going to have growing pains. You're going to have to, learn from your mistakes. He went out, tried the transfer portal, and went after Tate Martell. Everybody was happy. We thought Tate Martell was going to be the next thing, the next Heisman, right? Everybody was hyping him up, QB1. Well, it didn't work out. And he ended up getting Dan Enos, who obviously we saw the Alabama logo, the guys that he was under as well with Hurts and Tua. And we thought that would work out, and it still didn't. And what Manny did was he not only changed, but he wasn't afraid to go back. And he went right back into the transfer portal and tried it again with De'Ara King. He went right back and went after another high-profiled offensive coordinator in Rhett Lashley. And he wasn't done there. I mean, when the name Travaris Robinson comes up as a coaching opportunity, that is one name that in the past 10 years, the Miami Hurricanes have been wanting that guy. Whether it be not having enough money or just not the right timing or the staff didn't want him, there was always something. Well, that changed this year. And if you hear in recent interviews with T-Rob, he still took less money to come back to come to the University of Miami instead of going back to a program like University of Florida where he was already there, already accomplished things, know what it would be like there. But he took on a challenge and an opportunity. And I think that is one coach in particular where, I mean, you look at the secondary, the cornerback position alone, whether it be landing the guys in our backyard and recruiting or developing them to where they are able to play consistently on a college football level, that just hasn't worked out for us. And adding a guy like T-Rob, this is going to be the year where we see, in the recruiting trail, if we could land bigger guys, especially in our own state, and then also some of the guys that we have on this program. You have a Tyreek Stevenson who has a lot to prove coming from Georgia. You have an Al Blades that just got cleared. And you have a DJ Ivy who, is one of those guys who's not really a fan favorite to some fans because of some of, the easy, obvious mistakes that you think a cornerback shouldn't make. But that guy has all the tools and all the physical attributes to be a Pro Bowl cornerback, as crazy as that sounds. You look at him, and he is a typical corner. That's exactly what you want. And I think he still does have all the tools. I think it just comes down to having the right coaching. And I think part of our problem in that Blake Baker scheme that we had was there's too much thinking and not enough reacting, especially in that linebacker position. Linebacker is one position group in particular. It's a lot of reaction and a lot of just playing off the ball and off of instincts. And I think we need to get back to that.
Brad Tejeda, Canes Insight. Check out the channel right here on YouTube. We appreciate you stopping by, Brad.
Thank you.